That baby isn't his, Madame Min's voice cut through the winter garden like glass. Hannah felt the words ricochet in her chest, sharp and cold. She clutched her newborn tighter, the soft weight of him a small anchor in the storm of disbelief. Her heart hammered so violently she thought Jehun would hear it over the quiet hum of the mansion lights. Jehun didn't move. His dark eyes, normally unreadable, were pools of frozen confusion. His hand hovered near hers but never touched. Hannah's mouth went dry, the metallic tang of fear rose to her tongue. She wanted to scream, to argue, to make him see the truth, but all she could do was stare at the woman she had married into, the woman who had spent months whispering doubts, manipulating, tearing them apart from the inside. You can't say that, Hannah finally managed, her voice trembling. She could feel the baby's tiny chest against her own, the soft rhythm of his heartbeat, a fragile pulse of life in the tension-heavy room. Madame Min's sharp laugh cut through the air, scented faintly with the jasmine she always wore. "I can and I will," Min said. Her tone was clinical, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "I've raised my son to marry well, to honor the family. But you're a mistake. You trapped him and now you've trapped this child." Hannah's hands shook as she rocked the baby gently. The neon lights from the koi pond outside flickered across the glass walls of the winter garden, painting Min's face in streaks of green and silver. Rain tapped against the roof, a soft, mocking rhythm. Hannah tasted bitterness on her tongue. Tea gone cold, fear, disbelief. Jehun finally spoke, but his voice was low, hesitant. "Hannah, he faltered. "We should confirm. The test, the paternity test." The words were knives. Hannah felt the baby stir, tiny fingers curling around hers. She met Jehun's gaze, searching for any sign of the man she had married, the one who had whispered promises in the dark, who had held her through late-night hospital shifts, who had seemed unshakably loyal. But there was only hesitation. Silence. And the echo of her mother-in-law's verdict. "You can't do this," Hannah said, her voice breaking. "He's your son, Jehun. You know that. You know me." Madame Min's lips curved into a small, cruel smile. "I only want what's best for the Kong family," she said softly. "And blood doesn't lie. That baby isn't yours to protect." Hannah felt dizzy, the room tilting around her. The scent of jasmine and mint from Min's tea, the wet stone smell from the koi pond, even the cold metal of the railing brushing against her elbow, everything seemed amplified. Her mind raced back through the last 9 months. The quiet mornings in their mansion, Jehun's absent but loving glances, Min's subtle comments that had seemed harmless at the time. She had brushed them off, tried to be polite, tried to be the daughter-in-law a matriarch could respect. Now every slight, every whispered doubt, every cold glance from Min slashed at her like 1,000 tiny knives. Jehun's silence was unbearable. Hannah's throat ached, her chest tightened. She had delivered their son just 2 days ago, and already her world had collapsed into suspicion and betrayal. She glanced down at the baby, soft, perfect, fragile, and felt a flicker of defiance ignite inside her. She would not let Min win, not without proof. Not while the child's innocence depended on her. Hannah swallowed hard. "I'll get the test. You'll see the truth." Madame Min shook her head slowly as if disappointed in a child. "There's no need," she said. "The truth is in his face. His look. You'll see what I see." She gestured casually toward the infant. Hannah's stomach dropped as her eyes followed the hand. Her son's tiny features. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his lips. For a terrifying moment doubt crept in. Could she be wrong? Could this woman be right? The thought made her hands tremble. Jehun ran a hand through his hair, dark eyes fixed somewhere past the glass ceiling, lost in thought. He finally said quietly, almost to himself, I don't know what to believe." The words tore through Hannah like a physical blow. She wanted to scream at him, to shake him until he remembered who she was, to demand that he remember the nights they had spent talking about their dreams, their son, their life. But the words died in her throat. She realized with sickening clarity that he was caught in the middle, between love for her, loyalty to his mother, and fear of family collapse. Hannah turned her gaze to the baby again, willing his tiny form to reassure her, to remind her that no one, not even the most manipulative mother-in-law, could undo the bond she had with him. The room felt suddenly stifling. The glass walls, the modern chandeliers, the scent of jasmine, all oppressive. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the roof with a persistent rhythm that matched her thundering heart. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He is his father's child. He is ours. You can't." She stopped herself, choking back tears. She couldn't let her voice quaver in front of Min, couldn't give her the satisfaction. Min's eyes glittered, sharp as obsidian. "You're not one of us," she said, each word deliberate, measured, cold. "You never will be. You've been a guest in this family, nothing more. And now, your child won't even belong." Hannah's grip tightened on the baby. The word, guest, echoed in her head. Every insult, every manipulative act Min had committed over the past months crystallized in her mind. All the small slights, the forced dinners, the whispered doubts, the forged hospital paperwork, everything pointed to one cruel design: to break her before the child even had a chance at belonging. She wanted to collapse, to fall to her knees in despair, but she couldn't. Not here. Not now. She took a slow breath, feeling the baby's warmth press against her chest. The soft, tiny heartbeat beneath her hand grounded her. She could survive this. She would survive this. The rain continued its rhythmic pounding, the city lights outside blurred by the water-streaked glass. Hannah met Jehun's eyes one last time, searching desperately for a spark of defense, a shield, any allegiance. But all she saw was doubt. Her voice hardened. "When did you stop believing me?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Jehun's lips pressed into a thin line. Min's cruel smile widened. The baby stirred, tiny fingers brushing her chin. Hannah swallowed the lump in her throat and straightened her back. She had no answers yet. But she would find them. She had to. And then she remembered something. Something that had happened 3 months earlier. A minor incident, almost forgettable at the time. A seed of doubt planted by Min herself. And as it came back, Hannah realized. This wasn't the beginning. It was only the culmination. The real story, the real battle, had started long before tonight. 3 months earlier. 3 months earlier, the winter garden was bright with sunlight instead of rain. Hannah Lee had been 6 months pregnant, her stomach already rounding like a soft crescent moon. She stood in the mansion's kitchen, carefully stirring a pot of simmering miso soup, the steam curling around her face, carrying the faint scent of sesame oil and fresh ginger. She hummed quietly, trying to ignore the tension that had begun threading through the household like a low, persistent hum. Madam Min entered, wearing her usual silk blouse in pale lavender, the jasmine scent trailing behind her. Hannah froze for a second, trying not to let her frustration show. She had learned long ago that Min's presence always carried a subtle test, one she was never entirely aware she was failing. "Hannah," Min said softly, brushing her manicured fingers along the counter. "You're stirring that soup quite vigorously for a pregnant woman. Careful with your wrist. You might strain it." Hannah forced a polite smile. "I've got it, thank you. The baby enjoys this recipe." Min's eyes flickered to the small bump beneath Hannah's sweater. "Of course. But, it's important that your husband feels connected too. You must keep him involved in the little details." The words seemed innocuous, but Hannah caught the underlying critique. A reminder that she was failing in some undefined way, that she was not enough. Later that afternoon, Hannah retreated to her office. An airy room on the second floor, walls lined with medical textbooks and personal notes. She sat at her desk, rubbing her temples. The mansion had always felt vast, even in her husband's absence, but lately it felt like a maze of observation. Every footstep in the hallway, every creak in the floors, felt like a signal she was being measured, evaluated, judged. Hannah's phone buzzed. A text from Jehun, "Running port inspections today. Lunch at 2? Don't wait for me. Jay." She stared at it, feeling a pang of both relief and loneliness. Relief because he trusted her to be independent, loneliness because she had expected him to be a shield against his mother. But he had not yet realized the full extent of Min's subtle campaigns. The first significant manipulation happened a week later. Hannah had ordered her prenatal tests from a lab she trusted. The results she assumed would arrive directly. Instead, the envelope was delayed. When it came, it had a small note from the lab. "Patient verification incomplete. Please contact your OB." Hannah frowned and called immediately, only to learn that the lab had received a fax from the mansion claiming an error on her account. It bore a signature that looked uncannily like hers. Her pulse quickened. Someone had forged her signature. She didn't yet suspect Min outright. The thought felt absurd. But when she called Jihun that evening, quietly explaining the situation, he brushed it off. Probably just a clerical error, Hannah. Don't worry about it, he said, his voice tired from negotiations at the port. Hannah wanted to argue, wanted him to fight for her, but she bit back her frustration. He had always been logical, but family matters, especially Min, were something he handled cautiously. Over the next few weeks, subtle jabs became routine. At a small family dinner, Min commented on Hannah's work schedule. You've been busy at the hospital, yes? Such a noble profession. But, doctors make good money, but they rarely understand the importance of family legacy. Some things cannot be measured in bedside manners. Guests chuckled politely, but the weight of the remark settled over Hannah like a damp blanket. Jihun's hand briefly brushed hers under the table, a silent reassurance, but he did not speak out against his mother. Hannah tried to regain control through compliance. She cooked more elaborate meals, dressed in the designer ensembles Min approved, even volunteered to help Min with a charity gala. Yet no matter how much effort she put in, the cold glances, the faint smirks, the whispered, "You'll never belong here" in the hallways, all of it kept eroding her confidence. One evening, Hannah met her friend Sujin at a quiet cafe near the hospital. The smell of freshly ground coffee and warm pastries enveloped her like a cocoon, a small comfort in the storm of her life. Sujin, a cybersecurity analyst, listened carefully as Hannah described Min's increasing interference and Jihun's hesitation. It's subtle, Sujin said thoughtfully, stirring her cappuccino. But manipulative. Delays, forged documents, whispered doubts. It's classic triangulation. She's isolating you from both your husband and the environment that could support you. You need proof, Hannah. Hard evidence, not just feelings. Hannah nodded, the idea gnawing at her. She had always trusted instincts, but now she needed more. Something concrete to defend herself and her child. She tucked the thought away, promising herself that she would not allow Min to manipulate her without consequences. Back at the mansion, the first public humiliation occurred during another dinner. Min had invited extended family under the guise of celebrating the upcoming birth. Hannah had prepared herself mentally, yet she was still unprepared when Min leaned forward, voice rich and honeyed, and said, "Hannah dear, I admire your dedication at the hospital. Really I do. But the Kong family must consider lineage. Some children resemble their parents in every way, others, well, not so much." The room went silent. The air felt heavy, almost tangible, and Hannah's stomach dropped. She forced a smile, pouring wine into a glass she did not drink. Jihun's jaw tightened, his hand brushing hers once under the table, but again he did not speak. She realized with a creeping horror that he had begun to accept Min's framing of the narrative, or at least feared contradicting her. After the dinner, Hannah retreated to the rooftop garden. The faint smell of wet stone and jasmine drifted through the air, and she wrapped herself in her shawl, trying to steady the trembling of her hands. Her baby kicked softly, a tiny, insistent reminder that she was not powerless. Hannah pressed her cheek against her own stomach, whispering promises she hoped her child could hear. "I will protect you. I will not let her control our story." The breaking point had not yet come, but the seeds were planted. Every subtle act of manipulation, every delayed test, every whispered insinuation had begun to form a web that Hannah could see, if only dimly, threatening to ensnare her family and her future. 3 months earlier had seemed ordinary on the surface, but in retrospect, it had been the beginning of a psychological siege, one that would crescendo into the confrontation Hannah now remembered so vividly. And as she looked up at the sky, the city lights twinkling faintly through the cold glass, she realized that survival would require more than patience. It would require strategy, vigilance, and the courage to fight for truth in the face of betrayal. The subtle manipulations had grown louder by the time Hannah entered her 7th month. The mansion no longer felt like a home. It had become a theater where she was constantly on stage, performing for Min's approval, or more often, enduring her calculated disapproval. It began with the mail. Hannah had ordered a set of prenatal supplements from a boutique pharmacy she trusted, items Jihun had recommended for her pregnancy. When the package arrived days late, she noticed the shipping label had been tampered with. A closer look revealed that the recipient's address had been changed, redirecting it to a neighboring district for an entire day before being rerouted to her. It was a minor inconvenience, but to Hannah, it felt like a warning. Min's fingerprints were everywhere. The psychological attacks had started subtly, subtle enough to make Hannah doubt herself. During a routine checkup, her OB-GYN had commented, "Your schedule seems tight. Are you sure you're balancing rest?" Min had called the clinic days earlier, inquiring under the guise of concern, subtly inserting doubt into the doctor's mind. Hannah had brushed it off as coincidence. By now she knew better. At the mansion, Min escalated her tactics. Hannah had taken to walking quietly through the halls, avoiding eye contact, trying to remain neutral during family gatherings. But Min always found a way to pierce her armor. One evening, Hannah entered the dining room for a casual dinner, only to find the table set for an elaborate gathering she had not been informed about. Min's sharp eyes traced her movements. "You should try to make yourself useful," Min said, voice smooth as silk. "Even in small ways, it helps the family notice your commitment." The words dripped with poison and the guests laughed politely. Hannah felt the sting of humiliation, a hot flush creeping up her neck. She clenched her fists beneath the table, gripping the fabric of her dress to remind herself to stay composed. Jehun was present as always, but he remained silent. She caught his hand under the table, a brief squeeze that was both comforting and painfully insufficient. He had begun to avoid confronting Min directly, fearing family strife or perhaps underestimating the extent of her manipulations. Hannah realized that the man she had trusted to defend her had become a bystander in his own home. The tipping point came with forged medical documents. Hannah had noticed inconsistencies in a routine blood test report. The date stamps did not align with the actual lab schedule, and a signature on the report looked suspiciously like hers but not quite. Initially, she doubted herself. Perhaps the stress of the pregnancy was affecting her perception, but she knew the handwriting well enough to recognize the subtle irregularities. Min had intercepted the paperwork, altered it, and sent it back to Hannah in a convincing forgery. Determined to gather proof, Hannah began recording small pieces of evidence: phone calls, unusual documents, visitor logs. She reached out to Sujin, her friend and cybersecurity analyst, for advice. Sujin had been invaluable in pointing out subtle inconsistencies in digital metadata and email headers, giving Hannah a sense of control she had not felt in months. Yet even with evidence accumulating, the emotional toll was immense. One evening, Min cornered Hannah in the mansion's library, her tone deceptively gentle. "Hannah," Min said, tilting her head slightly, "I've been thinking about the family legacy. You know, it's delicate, easily broken. Sometimes it takes a firm hand to keep things in order." Her eyes glinted, calculating. "A child needs stability. Do you understand what I mean?" Hannah nodded slowly, swallowing the sharp retort that rose in her throat. Min's message was clear. She was not to be trusted, her every move scrutinized, her every word judged. Jehun was late that night, delayed by port inspections and negotiations with rival shipping factions. When he arrived, he found Hannah tense, eyes red from holding back tears. I'm sorry," he murmured, unsure if he was apologizing for being late or for his mother's cruelty. Hannah's stomach tightened with frustration. He was not her enemy, but his silence and inaction felt like betrayal. The following week, Min's attacks escalated again. She arranged for Hannah to receive an invitation to a charity gala with the entire extended family, ostensibly to honor her charitable contributions as a doctor. Hannah prepared meticulously, selecting a simple yet elegant navy dress, styling her hair carefully. When she arrived, she was ushered to a corner table deliberately placed far from Jehun, and introduced with subtle disdain by Min. The whispers around the room were faint but unmistakable. "Does she really belong here? I wonder if she understands our traditions." Hannah felt the heat of embarrassment rise in her chest. She gritted her teeth, smiling politely, trying to maintain composure for her husband and unborn child. But the real blow came the next morning. Hannah received a small package on her bedside table. Inside was a tiny baby gift set, carefully wrapped. On the top, Min had scrawled in delicate handwriting, "Stop pretending. That child isn't Kong blood." Hannah's hands trembled as she held the package. The words were like ice injected into her veins. Her breaking point, the one that had been building for months, finally crystallized. She sought refuge in the mansion's rooftop garden, the soft scent of wet stone and jasmine mingling with the cool morning air. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder of life, of hope, of innocence untouched by family politics. Hannah pressed her hands against her stomach, feeling the movement, the tiny heartbeat. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I will not let her win. I will not let this destroy us." In that moment she realized that Min's manipulation was not random. Every delayed test, every public humiliation, every whispered insinuation had been deliberate. Min had orchestrated a psychological siege, and Jehun's silence had enabled it. Hannah's fear was now joined by a cold, determined clarity. She would fight, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with strategy, evidence, and undeniable truth. Hannah began planning quietly. She catalogued every phone call, every suspicious envelope, every remark Min had made in passing. She spoke to Sujin in hushed tones, mapping out the digital trail Min had inadvertently left. By the end of the week, Hannah had the beginnings of a dossier, a small collection of proof that would one day reveal the full scope of Min's schemes. As she looked out over the city from the rooftop, the cold wind brushing her hair against her face, Hannah felt a spark of resolve she hadn't known she possessed. The mansion felt less like a cage and more like a chessboard. Every move Min had made would eventually be countered. And when the time came, the truth would emerge, unassailable, undeniable. But for now she held herself together, waiting, watching, preparing. Min's next move was inevitable and Hannah would be ready. The quiet of the rooftop was deceptive. Below, the city moved on, unaware of the storm gathering inside the walls of the Kong mansion. Hannah pressed her hands to her swollen belly, feeling the life inside her, and whispered a promise. "We will survive this. And when the time comes, justice will follow." Hannah didn't speak to Min for 2 days after the rooftop garden incident. She avoided the mansion entirely, retreating to her hospital office and spending long hours reviewing patient files, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards grounding her. Each newborn she held, each worried parent she reassured, reminded her why she had chosen this profession: to protect innocence. Her own child's innocence was now the most precious thing in her life, and she would shield it at any cost. Sujin met her at the cafe they frequented, the air rich with the scent of roasted coffee beans and sweet pastries. Hannah slid into the booth, barely noticing the warmth around her. "Sujin," she said, voice tight, "I need your help. It's Min. She's been forging documents, manipulating hospital records, intercepting my mail. She's trying to make Jehun doubt me, doubt my child." Sujin's eyes narrowed, lips pressing into a thin line. "You have proof." Hannah slid a folder across the table. Inside were scans of suspicious medical forms, prenatal test reports that arrived with inconsistent dates, files with metadata she couldn't have altered. "I noticed subtle changes in the digital signatures," Hannah explained. "The printer codes don't match the hospital's equipment. The timestamps are wrong. Someone's been interfering." Sujin's fingers hovered over the documents. "This is serious. Metadata doesn't lie. Whoever did this went out of their way to forge your signature digitally and physically. If you can get more, you can create a chain of evidence that's airtight." Hannah felt a flicker of hope, quickly tempered by caution. She had to be discreet. Any suspicion could tip Min off. "I need to be careful," Hannah said. "She watches everything. The mansion, the calls, even Jehun is. I can't rely on him right now." Sujin nodded. "We'll work around it. Secure devices, encrypted backups, call logs. We'll document everything." That evening, Hannah returned to the mansion under the guise of preparing dinner. She moved silently through the halls, the smell of Min's jasmine perfume lingering like a warning. She entered her office, closing the door behind her, and began cataloging evidence. Each document, each suspicious email, each altered report was carefully scanned and time-stamped. She recorded calls from Min, pretending to answer as usual while capturing every inflection of her voice, every manipulative suggestion. The baby kicked as she worked, tiny movements reminding Hannah of her purpose. She whispered to him softly, feeling a surge of determination. "We'll be safe. I'll make sure of it." Her first concrete breakthrough came 2 nights later. Hannah had requested a private lab kit for a DNA test, meant to verify her child's parentage without interference. She had arranged for the kit to be delivered to Sujin's apartment, bypassing the mansion entirely. The package arrived at noon, and Hannah retrieved it under the guise of a hospital errand. She and Sujin conducted the test discreetly, following the instructions meticulously. Every swab, every vial, every form was sealed, documented, and photographed. While waiting for the results, Hannah focused on gathering more evidence against Min. She requested visitor logs from the hospital, carefully noting any unusual entries, particularly calls or deliveries that coincided with the timing of the forged documents. She traced the IP addresses of emails sent to her from the mansion and cross-referenced them with Min's known devices. It was painstaking work, but Hannah had grown methodical, almost surgical in her approach. One evening, as she reviewed security footage from the mansion's office printers, Hannah noticed a small anomaly. The timestamp on one document, another forged medical report, showed activity at a time when only Min had access. She froze, heart racing. The footage was grainy but sufficient to show Min entering the office and leaving minutes later, the document in hand. Her breath caught as the truth crystallized. Min had orchestrated everything. Every delay, every insinuation, every public humiliation. It had been deliberate. Hannah felt a mix of fury and relief. She was angry, of course, but also relieved to finally have proof. Not speculation. Not feelings. Evidence. Hard, undeniable evidence. The next day, Hannah met Sujin again to discuss the footage. "This is it," Hannah said, pointing at the grainy screen. "This shows Min's interference. With this, combined with the metadata and the intercepted calls, we can build a full picture. There's no way Jae-hoon, or anyone, can dispute it." Sujin leaned back, impressed. "You've done well, Hannah. Most people would panic. You've approached this methodically. If you keep compiling like this, we'll have a rock-solid case." Hannah nodded but felt a twinge of sadness. She had reached a moment of clarity. She could not rely on her husband. He had been complicit, whether through fear, loyalty to his mother, or indecision. She would fight for her child and herself, but she would do it alone if necessary. That night, Hannah returned to the mansion, her movements calm and deliberate. Min was in the drawing room arranging the table for dinner, oblivious to Hannah's careful observations. Hannah carried herself with quiet confidence, masking the storm of planning and evidence gathering within her. Jae-hoon arrived late again, distracted by port negotiations and rivalries. He kissed her gently on the forehead, murmuring, "I missed you today." Hannah pressed a polite smile to her face, feeling the distance between them more keenly than ever. She had realized that love alone was not enough. Trust and action mattered more. And so far, Jae-hoon had failed to act. As Hannah prepared for bed later that night, she carefully placed the scanned documents, recordings, and security footage into a secure folder on a flash drive. She hid it in the lining of her coat, a precaution in case Min discovered any of her ongoing digital activities. The baby kicked again and Hannah smiled softly, pressing a hand to her stomach. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "We just have to wait for the right moment." The awakening had come. Hannah no longer tried to win Min's approval or suppress the constant humiliation. She had clarity, purpose, and the tools she needed. Every action from this point forward would be deliberate, measured, strategic. She would protect her child, expose the manipulation, and ensure justice, quiet but undeniable, was served. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Hannah acknowledged a new reality. Jae-hoon's hesitation had already caused damage. He might regret it later, but for now she would not depend on him. The mother-in-law who had once seemed invincible was now exposed, vulnerable to her own overreach. Hannah's resolve solidified as she turned off the bedside lamp and let the soft hum of the city filter through her window. This was only the beginning. The day Hannah had been waiting for arrived quietly, without fanfare. She had spent weeks compiling evidence. Metadata from forged documents, security footage of Min in the mansion office, intercepted emails and phone calls carefully recorded. The DNA results stored securely at Sujin's apartment confirmed what Hannah had always known. Her child was unquestionably Jae-hoon's. Hannah entered the mansion calmly, the flash drive concealed in her bag. The winter sun filtered through the glass walls of the drawing room, casting pale streaks across the polished marble floor. Jae-hoon was there, reviewing port schedules, his dark hair tousled and eyes heavy with fatigue. Min, as always, floated about the room with the grace of a queen surveying her domain. But Hannah felt no fear, only determination. "Jae-hoon," she began, her voice steady. He looked up, surprised by the formality. We need to talk. Min raised a delicate eyebrow. About what, dear? You seem tense. Her tone was honeyed, dripping with feigned concern. Hannah ignored her. I have proof, Hannah said, placing the flash drive on the polished oak table. Evidence of your interference, of your manipulations, and of the lies you've told my husband. She met Jehun's gaze directly. I trusted you. I trusted both of you. And now I have to defend myself and my child against your schemes. Min's lips pressed into a thin line. Hannah, this is unnecessary. Perhaps you're overreacting. A mother only wants to protect her family. Hannah shook her head. Protect your family? By telling my husband that my child isn't his? By intercepting my mail? Forging documents? Humiliating me in front of friends and family? That's not protection. That's control. And it ends now. Jehun looked from Hannah to his mother, confusion etched on his face. Hannah. You stayed silent, Hannah said sharply, her chest tightening. You let her manipulate every step of my pregnancy. You let her plant doubt in your mind and in the minds of others. You were supposed to be my partner. You chose silence. The room fell silent. Min's usual composure faltered for the first time, a flicker of irritation crossing her carefully maintained facade. She opened her mouth, but Hannah continued, voice calm but unyielding. I have security footage of you, Min, entering my office and tampering with medical records. I have phone calls where you suggest I'm unfit, where you sow doubt. I have emails that show attempts to isolate me from Jehun. And the DNA test proves my child is his. Hannah pressed the flash drive forward, sliding it across the table like a declaration. Jehun ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. Hannah, I had no idea it went this far. I should have. His voice faltered. He couldn't finish the sentence, and the weight of his inaction hung heavy in the room. Min's eyes narrowed, the predatory sharpness returning. You think a file on a flash drive can undo years of tradition, years of careful protection? Do you really believe you can tarnish my reputation with a few documents and recordings? I believe the truth matters more than appearances, Hannah replied, meeting her mother-in-law's gaze without flinching. And I believe my child deserves to grow up without this toxic environment. That's why I've documented everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every forged signature. You can't deny it. Min's composure cracked further. You ungrateful child, she spat, her voice rising. I raised your husband, gave him a position in this world, and you accuse me of wrongdoing? You think you can destroy the Kong family with, what? Evidence. Jehun stood suddenly, placing himself between the two women. Mom, stop. This isn't helping. Hannah's right. We need to see the facts. She has proof. His voice was low but firm. Hannah watched him, noting the conflict in his expression. He had finally shifted from passive observer to reluctant participant in the truth. Min's shoulders stiffened. You would side with her over your own mother? Her voice was sharp, incredulous. Jehun shook his head. I'm not siding with anyone. I'm choosing reality over manipulation. Hannah has been patient long enough. We need to address this responsibly. Hannah exhaled, feeling a flicker of relief. The moment of confrontation had come, and she had maintained control. We can go through each document, each recording. You'll see exactly what you've done. You'll see the consequences of your actions. Min's face paled just slightly as she realized Hannah had indeed covered every angle. The security footage alone placed her at the center of the interference. The metadata confirmed the forgery. And the DNA test, the final nail in the coffin, was indisputable. Hannah and Sujin went through each piece of evidence systematically. Jehun watched silently, occasionally nodding as the chain of manipulation became clear. Min tried to argue, tried to deflect, but each claim was countered with concrete proof. Every forged document, every intercepted email, every recording was laid bare. The mansion, once a place of covert psychological warfare, had become a courtroom of undeniable truth. Finally, Hannah held up the DNA results. The proof was absolute. Min's face, usually so confident, registered disbelief for the first time. This is impossible, she murmured, voice shaking. No, Hannah said firmly. It's inevitable. The truth always finds a way. Jehun stepped closer, taking Hannah's hand gently. I see it now, Hannah. I should have trusted you, protected you. I failed. I won't make that mistake again. Hannah felt a bittersweet pang. She wanted to feel relief, but the months of isolation, humiliation, and manipulation had left their mark. Still, the weight lifted slightly, replaced with clarity and resolve. Justice had not yet been fully enacted, but the first step had been taken: exposure. Min sank into a chair, her elegant composure shattered. Hannah noticed for the first time the flicker of human vulnerability, the fear of losing control, the realization that her schemes were no longer effective. But there was no satisfaction in this vulnerability. Hannah's focus was her child, her life, and the path forward. You will leave, Hannah said quietly, voice steady. You will step back from my life, from my husband, from my child. If you continue this, there will be legal consequences. I have the evidence. Everything. Min's eyes flitted to Jehun, perhaps seeking support, but he remained silent, firmly by Hannah's side. The balance had shifted irrevocably. The aftermath began immediately. Min retreated to her private quarters, defeated but still dangerous in her quiet plotting. Jehun, shaken but awakened, apologized repeatedly to Hannah, acknowledging the months of hesitation that had allowed his mother to manipulate their lives. Hannah accepted his apology cautiously, knowing trust would take time to rebuild, but she allowed a small glimmer of relief. For Hannah, the confrontation marked a turning point. She had reclaimed control, validated her experiences, and protected her child. The mansion was no longer a battleground dominated by Min's schemes. It was finally a place where truth could exist. Later that night, Hannah stood in the nursery watching her son sleep peacefully. The faint hum of the city filtered through the window, mingling with the scent of lavender she had placed on the dresser. She pressed her hand gently against his tiny chest. We've taken the first step, she whispered. The rest, we'll handle together. Justice had begun, and while the path ahead was uncertain, Hannah felt a clarity and strength she hadn't known before. 2 years had passed since the confrontation. The Kong mansion no longer held the oppressive weight it once had. The winter sun streamed through the large glass windows of the nursery, illuminating Hannah as she rocked her son gently in her arms. He had Jehun's dark eyes and the same faint dimple in his left cheek, a perfect reflection of his father, a fact Min had once denied so cruelly. Hannah smiled softly, pressing her forehead to his, feeling the warmth of life she had fought so fiercely to protect. Hannah's life had changed in ways she could never have anticipated. She had returned to her medical career with renewed determination, opening a boutique clinic specializing in maternal and neonatal care. The space smelled of eucalyptus and warm tea, decorated in muted blues and creams that exuded calm. Patients adored her for her empathy and precision, unaware of the battles she had fought outside the walls of her clinic. Hannah found satisfaction in work that saved lives, a tangible contrast to the psychological warfare she had endured at home. Jehun had been forced to face the consequences of his inaction. His mother's schemes had exposed vulnerabilities in his own businesses, particularly the port operations she had quietly influenced. Investors and colleagues had begun questioning his decision-making. While his empire was not destroyed, he had lost prestige and several key contracts, a tangible reminder that silence and complicity carried real costs. He carried regret, etched in the lines near his eyes, but Hannah noticed that he also carried determination to rebuild, not for Min but for his family. Min's fate was perhaps the most telling. Socially isolated and discredited within her own circles, she had been stripped of influence. Legal investigations into her forgeries and manipulations had forced her to step back entirely, leaving her with only the trappings of wealth but no real power. She resided in a smaller, less lavish apartment, the scent of jasmine lingering faintly in the air as a hollow echo of the home she had once controlled. Friends and family no longer sought her counsel, and her own health had begun to decline under the stress of her defeat. Hannah felt a small measure of justice in this, though she refused to take pleasure in suffering. Hannah had rebuilt her life meticulously. Every detail of her day, from the soft wool blanket draped over her clinic chair to the quiet morning walks she took with her son, was a conscious choice. She had learned that peace was not passive. It required careful cultivation. She had kept her son away from the toxic influence of the mansion, teaching him love, patience, and boundaries, values she had had to fight to protect. Jehun had grown more attentive, though Hannah remained cautious. Trust was not rebuilt overnight. One evening, as they walked through the small park near their new apartment, she observed him crouching to tie their son's tiny shoes, speaking gently, patiently, as though every word mattered. Hannah felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, a quiet acknowledgement that he had changed, but she remained vigilant. He had learned the consequences of silence the hard way. Hannah's friendship with Sujin had also deepened. The long hours spent documenting evidence, strategizing, and quietly plotting had forged a bond that went beyond casual friendship. Sujin had become an anchor, a reminder that alliances built on trust and mutual respect could withstand even the most calculated manipulations. Over coffee one morning, Sujin smiled at Hannah. "You've come so far," she said. "You've built a life that's yours. You didn't just survive, you thrived." Hannah had never felt the need to return to the mansion. Each visit, each interaction with Min had been replaced with careful boundaries and professional necessity. The air of dread and manipulation that once permeated the halls was gone from her life, replaced by calm routines and deliberate choices. Her son's laughter, bright and unburdened, filled spaces that had once been heavy with whispered criticism. On one particularly serene afternoon, Hannah received a call from Jehun, who had arranged a meeting with remaining stakeholders from the port business. He paused before speaking, his voice thoughtful. "Hannah, I've been making changes. I'm taking responsibility, restructuring the leadership, removing influences that don't belong. It's not perfect, but it's the right start." Hannah listened, sensing the shift in him. She offered a measured nod. "That's all I ask, Jehun. Accountability matters more than appearances." The truth of their past had been unflinching, but Hannah's resolve had been unwavering. She had faced the betrayal, gathered proof, and acted decisively. The scars remained, subtle and invisible to outsiders, but they reminded her of strength forged through trial. As she prepared dinner one evening, the smell of garlic and roasted vegetables filling the apartment, Hannah glanced at her son playing on the floor. His small fingers reached for a wooden block, his eyes shining with curiosity and trust. Hannah felt a swell of emotion, pride, relief, and determination. She had carved a space where her child could grow without fear, where her son could see the world as safe, fair, and honest. Later that night, Hannah sat by the window overlooking the city lights of New York. The hum of traffic and distant sirens was familiar, comforting in its constancy. She sipped tea, savoring the warmth and the soft bitterness, and allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had survived the storm, confronted the betrayal, and emerged stronger. The mother-in-law who had sought to control her was powerless. The husband who had faltered now accountable, and she had reclaimed her life. Her son stirred in his crib, tiny fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. Hannah stood, walking to him, feeling the weight of responsibility and love. "We've done it," she whispered. "We're free now. Free to choose our own path." In that moment she realized that the past, every manipulation, every whispered doubt, every delay and forgery, was no longer a chain but a foundation. She had transformed the hardship into clarity and action, and that clarity had built a life stronger than any obstacle Min could have placed in her path. The city stretched out below, vast and vibrant, full of possibilities. Hannah held her son close, inhaling the scent of his soft hair and the warmth of his skin. She felt the pulse of life and hope coursing through her. Every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of planning and patience had led to this quiet victory. The future was hers, untethered and unbound, and for the first time in years, Hannah allowed herself to envision a life filled with safety, achievement, and love, on her terms. The mansion, the schemes, the betrayals were behind her, memories of a war she had won not with anger, but with precision, patience, and courage. Hannah kissed her son's forehead one last time before tucking him into bed. The soft scent of lavender lingered in the room, mingling with the faint warmth of the night air. She looked out the window, the lights of New York twinkling like stars, and allowed herself a small, serene smile. She had fought for justice, she had reclaimed her family, and she had built a life that was truly hers. And in that quiet, radiant moment, Hannah Lee felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace.